Wait, side note, does anyone know if Uncle Sugar is taken on Twitter? Because I think I just found my new Twitter handle.
Yes.
Uncle Sugar? It's so freaking great. I feel like you should have a 1970s van and a really bad mustache.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Irenicast, the weekly podcast dedicated to conversations on faith and culture. We're your hosts. I'm Jeff.
I'm Mona.
And I'm Alan.
All right, we are back this week with a vengeance.
We're back.
We're back. We're here. Is it really, are you back if it's just something you do every week?
Yeah?
Yeah, yes.
I'm showing up.
Okay, so this week, I started Spotify.
Oh, good for you. How is it going?
It's going pretty good. The reason I started was because soon our podcast will be available on Spotify. They made an announcement in May. Yeah, they made an announcement in May that they're going to start doing podcasts, and they're running through a beta program right now, which we may be approved for. We'll keep you updated on that. But anyway, that's the reason I got it, and it was 99 cents for 3 months just to test it out. So I was like, okay, I'll give it a whirl. So I'm listening, and I'm thinking, all right, I'm older now, and I don't keep up with today's music like I used to. And this is basically just a rant. So if you'll allow me the permission.
Oh, man, I love a good rant. Let's hear it.
So I went to the top 50, because they have a built-in playlist, top 50 American hits. Like, these are the songs that people are listening to right now. And man, you know, when you're young and you say, and your parents say, or some adult says, oh, the music today isn't like it was when I was a kid. Da, 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 da. The music today is not like when when I was a kid. Like, it is just ridiculous. So apparently, in order to be on the top 50, you have to, first of all, your name has to be Nicki Minaj, because I'm pretty sure she's on every song that ever exists on the top 50.
Why are you hating on Nicki Minaj?
I don't like her. I mean, I don't like her music. I don't know her, but whatever persona she portrays is ridiculous to me.
She's like one of the few uber confident female figures out there.
I must confess that I do like Nicki Minaj, and I like her music.
I have no problem. It's not the typical rant. Like, I have no problem with the repetition, because I think sometimes I enjoy repetition. But there's just something about, like, the lyrical content and the muse. I don't know. I can't even put my finger on it. But I'm just listening to it, and I feel exhausted by the end of a song, because I feel like, first of all, didn't I just hear this exact same song the song before? Because every lyric is the same. For me, a good song, it can be, like, honestly, one of the positive things, I find Carly Rae Jepsen delightful. I really there's, some of the tunes are catchy and I'll listen to them and I like them, but just the overall content, I feel like I was listening to the same lyrics over and over again with just different music in the background.
There are some, I have to admit, lately that, like, the lyrics are pretty ridiculously stupid. Like the one about bodies, like, your body's perfect, so, and then there's another one. There's another one that's like, you got me singing in the shower. But my all-time favorite stupid pop song out right now, have you guys heard this one? Is Adam Lambert's Ghost Town song. It's like a pop, like, house kind of beat, like, supposed to be a dance song, but, like, there's, like, tumbleweeds and, like, Western thematics, and the chorus is something like, my heart is a ghost town. Awesome. I was like, is this a serious song? It is a serious song, like an actual hit.
See, that's a shame, because Adam Lambert, I mean, anyone who can take up...
Very talented, right?
Yeah, anyone who can take up Freddie Mercury's mantle and be a part of Queen, you've got to give them props. But, man...
Songwriting is just lacking. Okay, so I have to agree with you a little bit on your...
The problem is that, Jeff, you have a condition, and it's called being over 32. It's true. Scientists have told us that you stop listening to new music once you hit 32 years old.
No, I reject
Isn't that brilliant?
that.
Well, first of all, that's not true for me. I listen to new music all the time. In fact, that's a big part of the reason, aside from, getting used to the interface for the podcast and all that stuff, that's a big reason I started Spotify, was so that I could do more listening projects where I could expose myself to different music. And I do all the time. Like, I have my favorites, but I went in with an open mind, like, okay, I'm going to give this a listen. And to be honest, there were songs that were good, that I liked, that were kind of catchy, that I even added to my own playlist. But I'm just saying, like, the overall personality of music that is pop in the top charts or whatever is just ridiculous.
So
But I
it's
really
it's
like the lyrics.
narcissistic, but not in the cool rocker kind of way, right?
Maybe expressing a very small range of human experiences just
Yeah.
about like dating and sex.
Yeah, and maybe it's just the contrast because I love hip hop music and I, especially like stuff that has something to say, but it seems at least the popular aspect of it seems to evolved into this like not really saying anything, just really telling people what I have and the people that I do.
But Jeff, say something because I'm giving up on you. No?
I've sang that so many times.
Anyone?
I don't know that one.
Oh, you don't know the song? Oh,
Something.
I'm giving up on you. It's like this really sad breakup song.
So
like every
sad.
time it comes on, everyone like sheds a private single tear, you know?
Well, those lyrics are appropriate with how I feel about music in general today. All right. Well, this week we are going to be talking about criminal justice. And I think it's a pretty broad topic as usual, and I think there's some interesting things that can be talked about there. And on the other side of the music, we will talk about it. Yes. All right. This week, we are talking about criminal justice, and there's a lot connected to that. And I think we figured it would be a good way to start is just kind of throw out some statistics to kind of give us a broad base on where we stand right now and let that guide our conversations. Because I feel like there's probably a lot of misconceptions about what the prison system is and that everyone in there is, justified for being in there, which isn't necessarily the case. So Mona, you have some statistics for us. Let's let that lay the groundwork for us.
Yeah. So we have 2.3 million people living behind bars in the US. 2.3 million. And that's 500,000 more than China that has 5 times our population. So we have the highest incarceration rates in the world. So just let that sink in for a moment that we are basically an imprisoned society. And of course, prison and incarceration is a portion of criminal justice, but this is where we thought we'd start because there's some really real figures here that we can sort of like let sink in and paint a broad picture for us. So there are 90% of inmates today are male. 70% have not graduated high school. African Americans and Latinos make up 58% of the population. 1/3 of Black men will spend time in prison during the course of their lives. So 1/3. Interestingly, we use a lot of prisoners for labor. So I wanted to read this quote quickly. This is from the Left Business Observer. The federal prison industry produces 100% of all military helmets, ammunition belts, bulletproof vests, ID tags, shirts, pants, tents, bags, canteens, war supply. Along with war supplies, prison workers supply 98% of the entire market for equipment assembly services, 93% of paints and paintbrushes, 92% of stove assembly, and on and on and on. So it's likely that a lot of products that we purchase for our homes are made by inmates who make around $1 to $4 a day for their labor. And it's legal because they're incarcerated. So a lot of the effects of this high mass incarceration is that a lot of times we create violent criminals by mixing nonviolent and violent offenders in the same sorts of facilities, and they build networks, and they tend to repeat. About 2/3 of prisoners reoffend.
I heard it goes up to like 75% in some cases. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll say why in a moment. Prisons are a place where diseases and pandemics are kind of located. And also prisons cost us $70 billion a year for corrections, which is like a huge portion of our Homeland Security budget, or domestic security. And so it's really interesting, though, how much this issue is related to so many other issues. For example, housing stability and medical insurance. If people can't get that outside prisons, they become more dependent on the prison system that provides those things for them a lot of times. Legal representation, we have a really broken legal system because a lot of times people who are poor, a lot of times people of color, cannot afford a defense. So they get public defenders that are way overworked and don't care about their case. And a lot of times they're barely represented at all. The war on drugs, zero tolerance, 3 strikes policies have tended to criminalize people who are poor more than people who have resources. Education disparities and urban underdevelopment are huge problems. For example, people who are born into the inner city don't get educational opportunities, don't get resources like people who are born in the suburbs, and that tends to also be a race issue. And then, as we've seen in the news, in Black Lives Matter, systematic racism inside our systems, inside our police forces, and that's kind of embedded in the way that we see justice. And a lot of times there is this perception that young Black males are more criminal and more dangerous and more unruly, and therefore need to be punished almost proactively or preventatively. And finally, the other thing I wanted to talk about was
before you move on from that.
Yeah.
There is a myth out there that says because the prison population is so overly populated by certain minorities when it's not reflecting society at large, people say that that's just because these people act that way, or they categorize an entire group of people, and because of their culture, that's what's putting them in prisons and things like that. But it's worth it to point out, as far as I'm very interested in capital punishment and doing some research on that. It's pretty stark to consider that Black people, this is a quote from a book, Blacks who kill whites are 22 times more likely to face execution than Blacks who kill Blacks. You can say this is a problem that is with people of a certain color. It's their problem and it's not ours. But if you look at the actual data, there's disparity outside of the actions of individuals. Just because you are a certain minority or a certain ethnicity, you're more likely to be executed. You're more likely to be incarcerated, regardless of the decisions that you've made. So I think that's worth pointing out.
That is, and I have a nonviolent stat to accompany that. Even though statistically 2/3 of crack cocaine users are white and Caucasian, 80% of people incarcerated for crack cocaine are Black. So there's a huge statistical disparity between who's probably actually doing these things and who actually gets punished for it. And a lot of it falls around race and educational lines. And so the other thing I wanted to talk about was private prisons, because a lot of people don't really know this about the way that the prison industry is shifting. But the private prison cost per inmate can be 6 times more than a public prison cost and 5 times more than a Harvard tuition every year. So it can cost up to $120,000 a year for private prison incarcerations. And the reason this is so interesting is because private prisons are hugely lucrative because they make contracts with the government to contract out imprisonment. And in the contracts, they write in clauses that the local governments have to guarantee maximum incarceration rates so that they can be profitable. So you're talking about quotas for inmates, that we have to get a certain number of people incarcerated in order for these prisons to make money. And they're growing in numbers. Private prisons are growing in numbers. And so
one anecdote that I might add to that, there actually was a judge. Did you hear about this? I forgot what state it is, and I forget the exact numbers. There was a judge who was arrested and, ironically enough, put in prison for imprisoning all of these minors who were just on the cusp of adulthood. All of these minors who were mostly Black, being imprisoned regardless of whether they were innocent or not. He was just sending them straight to prison and declaring them guilty because he was getting kickbacks from a prison that was for profit. Yeah.
Oh, my God. We've embedded capitalism inside of our justice system in such a way that people are making serious money when punishment happens, regardless of culpability. So insanely broken. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. All of these things, all of the different factors, and we're trying to take a chunk out of this. But for you guys, let me ask you, what strikes you as the most significant? For me, education stands out. That the lack of opportunity really is like a direct pipeline to incarceration, and the race issue, of course, which we've talked about.
I want to say early on, just real quick before you respond, Jeff, early on, that none of us are anti-police or anti-government or anything like that. We just think there are some really important problems that we have to address. But I don't think any of us would say crime's not a problem, right? None of us would say violent offenders shouldn't be prosecuted or anything like that. I just wanted to kind of clarify that ahead of time, because sometimes
we're not anarchists. Mm-hmm. That's not.
I have friends who are Christian anarchists, but that's not necessarily me.
The problem for me is our philosophy on crime and punishment, and to me, the operative word being punishment. There's no language that says we are wanting to rehabilitate. The language that we use is you do something wrong and you are going to be punished and you're going to pay for it. Not you do something wrong and we need to figure out why you did that wrong so that when you go through this system or this process, that on the other side, you will not only not do something wrong, but that you will contribute to the right that is around us. So I think we have a revenge-based justice system that is only amplified and will never change the more money we connect to it. And that's what all those statistics you're throwing out, they make me sick that our whole system has no incentive to change because it is so entrenched in money. And to me, that's a problem with almost everything that we have in our society, is because we're so capitalistic and consumeristic with everything, that the more we attach money to an issue, the further away we get from any kind of real resolution that's going to help people and make the world a better place.
I think it's worth pointing out that we're painting in broad categorization. There's different penal systems in the United States, in different states. And some have done a very good job in reversing numbers of reincarceration. Like you're talking about reformative justice versus punitive justice, like reforming the person and helping them become a part of a just society versus just punishing them. And I think some institutions, like if you look in California and the efforts that are being made toward like juvenile offenders, they're standing out in the nation as far as like recovering and helping these kids become a better part of society and make different choices. Whereas you look at other states, it's that operate on a more punitive form of justice, like you're talking about, Jeff. And that is difficult because those people become reoffenders again.
I'm just talking about, more than anything, the rhetoric that we use. So when people express their opinions about these issues, the social conversation or the national conversation becomes a fight because it becomes about two ideals that don't actually represent the reality.
I think also another thing that cannot be understated is the war on drugs in particular, because this is an example, I think, Jeff, of what you're saying. We are one of the only, what you would call advanced or developed countries in the world, even though that language is problematic, but we're one of the only ones that treats addiction as a criminal offense because of the war on drugs versus something that needs to be rehabilitated, people who need care. A lot of other countries like have really great social services for people who are addicted and work toward past addiction, but because we incarcerate addicted people, there's no solution. There's no end in sight.
And that's a big problem when it comes to, obviously connected to all this is the lack of understanding and things in place to deal with any kind of mental health issue. I just listened to a podcast, the Freakonomics podcast, and they talked about the incarceration and rehabilitation of sex offenders, specifically pedophiles, and how the rate of recovery is ridiculous. And the programs that we have in place, like Megan's Law, the registry, and all that kind of stuff, they interviewed a sex offender who said, honestly, I would have been less punished if I just killed that girl instead of molested her, because then at least I would have stayed in prison and died and wouldn't have dealt with all this scarlet letter stuff. And I'm not saying there's a right or wrong way, or I'm not saying that there's anything, but I'm saying that we don't explore things because we base our institutions and our policies on how we feel in the moment, not what actually produces results.
Did you know that people convicted of a felony, once they get out of prison, so they've done their time, they cannot vote in a lot of states? They can't vote. They have no citizenship anymore, even though they've paid their dues. So exactly what you're saying, like we don't ever forgive people once, we don't allow people to be rehabilitated. It's kind of interesting. But you're saying like it goes to this whole way we think about this stuff, the philosophy behind it.
Absolutely.
Do we actually believe people can change? There's people, I think a part of our culture believes that people can't change. You're either good or you're bad. We tend to see people along those lines.
But that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we don't believe that, then we won't put anything into place to even try.
It does. And
my theology
goes, I was about to say my theology goes completely against that, and not to just theologize everything, but I think one of the basic tenets of my faith is that people can change, and that especially like in the community of God, that's what we go for, is that there is forgiveness and reconciliation, and there is real change. And I have seen people change. And I know you guys have probably seen people change also.
Yeah, but I've also seen people use religion as a way to manipulate others.
True.
The cost of trusting somebody who has in the past been untrustworthy can be very high, for innocent people like children, And so it's very freaking complicated. But I think the preventative stuff the preventative systemic stuff is what I'm interested in. Like, why are people being driven to crime in the first place?
So,
What are our systems doing?
Before getting into that, like, just to say one more time, like, I think that we build, just to agree with Jeff, we build our systems of incarceration, like after the fact, after crimes are committed, on the idea that people need to be punished and that they can't change. And that's not true across the board, but that has been true historically for a lot of our systems. And that's why we have such a huge incarceration rate. And we're moving in a positive direction. I think, especially in California, I think the nonviolent drug offenders, those have been released from prison, I'm pretty sure, because of financial problems with the state and stuff like that. But we're moving in a different direction that's looking to rehabilitate people. And I think it's interesting what you're saying, Mona, and it's totally true. The stuff that causes crime, we can always just say it's a bad person, like, oh, that's something wrong with them, like they're just a bad egg or something and they're gonna commit crime. But a lot of the violence we see in other nations and in our own happens because of a lack of opportunity. When there's people who have lots of ability, but there's nowhere for them to go, crime seems to be like the most economically viable option.
Yeah, and I think you have to separate that from hate crimes like Charleston. You have to separate it. You have to separate violent from nonviolent and economically motivated people just trying to survive and get by and maybe making bad decisions versus people trying to actively express hatred. Those are very different camps. And, it's interesting. I was really interested, in what you're saying, Alan, about capital punishment. For example, the guy who did the Boston Marathon bombings, for example, was sentenced to the death penalty. And I know a lot of people in Boston did not want that. The majority of people in Boston didn't want it. They wanted to forgive. Even a lot of the families wanted to forgive this person and did not want the death sentence. And then someone else made the case that because our prison systems are so brutal, this guy probably would have been in isolation for a lot of his life, and his life quality would be so horrible that maybe it was more kind to do the death penalty. So
that's horrifying.
Isn't that horrifying? I mean, the ethics of this are really complex. And so, but I think it's interesting when the system works in such a way that, the jury was almost pre-selected in these trials to be pro-death penalty, even though the majority of the people in Boston didn't want that for this person.
Can we talk about the death penalty for a second?
Just before we move on to that, I think that's interesting. I think also another part of what we have going on is that every policy, whether it's a criminal policy or economic policy or everything like that, everything is behind our technology and our knowledge. With the whole thing, what was it? Brian Williams, the news anchor who told a story and then later remembered wrong and he wasn't in the plane. Is that the guy's name? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Where he made up this story where he said he was attacked.
Yeah, it's
his
Brian
plane
Williams.
was Brian Williams.
Yeah.
So developments in brain science have showed us that our memory is not nearly as reliable as possible. And our whole justice system, especially with violent crimes, is based off of someone else's memory of an account and then judging whose memory was more accurate to life. So, and then on top of that, when we talked on our race issue, if our brains are already wired to be a little bit more reactive to someone of color, and our justice system is based off what we remember and how our brain interprets a situation, then we're already right off starting on the wrong foot by the way that we even we judge whether someone's guilty or not. And I don't know if there's there's got to be a solution for that. But I think the problem is that when we propose an idea like that and say this is a problem, then the reaction of people is, well, don't you have a solution? Well, no, but we should work together to figure out a solution.
I can tell you what's not the solution. And this is historically true, and I'm quoting from Kingdom Ethics, Glenn Stassen, that the jury selection process often succeeds in selecting all white panels in areas where the majority of the population is African American.
We don't have representation.
We do not. And if people are, and I think it's true, I think people are subjected to or subconscious racism, or just, and maybe racism is too strong of a word, but prejudices. And because of that, we have to be sensitive and realizing that we're selecting people that are not representative of the community around us. Like, that right there is racism playing in a bigger way in our.
I would call it white supremacy. I would call it white supremacy. The whites are more fit to make those kinds of rulings and judgments, despite the community. But I mean, those are legal shenanigans, and that's again the broken legal system. But it's sad that we do have a system that allows a few people to decide for everyone. I mean, but also on the other hand, you can't have a legal system that's a majority rule. Otherwise, we'd still do lynchings and stuff like that. So
So my one axe to grind, so to speak, I'm just gonna throw it out here right now, is that whether our justice system is as best as it could be or not, we all know that it is broken in at least some way. That innocent people do get convicted and that guilty people don't. Like that stuff happens, and everyone would agree that there's no way to make it perfect. I would like to make the case that because our justice system is so broken and there is systemic racism and there are all these factors that we just threw out there, that executing people within this system is irresponsible. I think trusting our system to take or not take human life is wrong, morally wrong, because we can't trust a broken system to make a choice that's that significant.
I agree with that.
It's my opinion.
Yeah, and even if we had a perfect system, I don't think any
That's
person
true.
has the right to take a life of another person. I mean,
As a kid, you're told 2 wrongs don't make a right.
solving violence with violence, I think, is always problematic in one way or another.
We can't think in terms of coming up with a perfect system. I really think we need to think in terms of coming up with not perfect, but a good reason, moving our purpose or our reason for incarcerating from, less punitive to more redemptive. But on top of that, we can't think in terms at all of a set perfect system. We have to think in terms of an evolving system. How do we create a system that's flexible to where the nation is moving and where how our knowledge base is increasing? And if we don't do that, then it's always going to be an issue.
You mean like keeping up with technology and neuroscience?
Yeah, technology, science, and then just the pulse of where people are at. Like, for instance, if something major happens, like all the things that we've had gone on as far as race is concerned with Baltimore and now Charleston and all the stuff in between and before that, the system is always playing catch up instead of having, and I believe it's possible. I believe we have creative, smart, loving, compassionate people that if they got together could come up with a system that's not perfect, but at least is flexible enough to meet the real issues of what problems we face.
It's really interesting that you say that, because I think community has really been shown to be crucial in restoration for people who find themselves behind bars for whatever reason. A lot of the most successful prison and incarceration programs that I've been reading about have to do with building community and making people feel like they have a purpose and connection. For example, training CNI dogs or farming, ways that prisoners are able to build relationships with other people and animals. Whereas I think that trauma studies for me holds a lot of perspective, or in what you're saying, Jeff, that treating people who commit violent acts or commit acts that are morally bereft or, against society or whatever, as people who've probably statistically in all likelihood have been deeply wronged themselves and are just perpetuating what they know. If you approach it like that, the questions you ask become very different.
So you don't stick someone in isolation for years because they've...
Well, I mean, what good is it going to accomplish? I don't know.
And if we have a whole system that's based off of like that, putting someone in isolation and making them forget so much about what's good when they get out, then there's going to be no room for them to want to go out. And then we also have a problem of people, getting out at a late age and then not knowing what to do with their lives and basically wanting to come back in. There's no mindset for rehabilitation. I was a part of a church a couple years ago that did this great program where they took kids whose parents were in prison, took them on a bus once a year, and took them to visit their parents, and how the people that were visiting their kids in prison had a higher rate of not going back because they had and were presented a reason to not want to go back. Here's my kids, here's my family, here's something on the outside that I have looked forward to, instead of just beating every ounce of hope out of them.
But lest we be like completely naive, I have lots of friends who work in the jail systems, like in Southern California, and talking about community with people and building up community. Some people are so, I don't know, broken, or people would even say evil, that like the second that they have an opportunity to kill someone else, they'll do it. They'll just stab someone. And so like there's a...
I think this applies more to nonviolent offenders, which is why we need to separate the two. And I would agree with you too. Like people who end up in isolation, generally it's because it's not safe for anyone to interact with them, right? That's why they have to be alone, because it's not safe for the guards. It's not safe for the guards, all the people who work in there.
Creative ways to address that, like providing some sort of community to them, even if it's not, face to face.
And not to be over cynical, but I'm sure there are people like that. But then there are also people who have become like that because of the system, because I've also, met and known prison guards, some really great and some just the stories they tell and nonchalantly about how, oh yeah, we roughed up this guy and da 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 for seemingly nothing.
The system's broken their humanity just as much as it has the people who are incarcerated. Like that
Oh yeah,
that's
absolutely. I think that's another side effect of the criminal justice system, which I mean we could have a whole episode on, is the people that are involved in it. Because you talk about the death penalty, and I agree 100% with your assessment of it's morally wrong for us to make that decision on a system that's so broken. But at the same time, even if the system wasn't, I don't think putting anyone to death is a good idea, because there's someone that has to put that person to death. Someone who is a law-abiding citizen, someone who's hopefully a decent person, is putting themselves and being put in a position to kill someone, regardless of how much they deserve it.
Interesting. Yeah, we don't often talk about the effects of the people who are meting out this system and what it does to their psyche and their soul.
Hey, if you want your if you want your week to be completely ruined, look up the families who have tried to lobby for the stay of execution for people who have murdered their family members, and you'll see families like trying to get this person to be, I don't know, life in prison, but not executed, and then watching those families have to watch the murderer be executed in front of them because the system doesn't react to the family's like desires or needs. It's a pretty sick thing. Yeah.
I was really impressed by the image. Do you guys remember a couple of years ago there was a shooting at an Amish school?
Yes.
And then the community got together and made food and took it to the shooter's, was it his widow or his family members, and forgave them and offered them kindness. Like I'm just like tearing up just thinking about it. It gives me chills to think about how powerful forgiveness can be, especially for those surrounding all of, the wake of destruction and the healing that can happen as a result of not being punitive.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing that also right now in Charleston, the response of the congregation members.
But mixing that, I do have to say though, like the Charleston forgiveness. Yeah. So the family of Charleston's where the shooter shot 9 people, and the family has publicly forgiven him. And I am completely moved and absolutely floored by the forgiveness that the people have offered. And I think it's a very powerful thing. I've also seen white people that I know, or people who belong to the system that created this killer, so to speak, they'll like hold up the forgiveness as this great example of our Christianity, as a great example of our, American spirit, or whatever they say, but they don't take responsibility at all for setting up the circumstances for what happened. They don't take responsibility for belonging to. What circumstances?
Can you be more specific?
Yeah, the institutional racism in that state, or like, I don't know, we tend to say the black community and then lump them all together. Like, this is a little instance of the white community. We have to like recognize that a hate crime has been done in our name. And instead of just saying, look how great this black church is for giving this person, I do want to say that, like, it does move me as a Christian and as a human being. But at the same time, I have to like realize like there's some repentance and some deep thinking that we have to do, instead of just making that a token of like identifying with those black people now that they're forgiving him.
That's a really, really good point. Like, I don't think that I've seen people using that instance of forgiveness to justify not taking down the Confederate flag. You know what I mean? So I think that's a really good point, is that we have to be sure that we don't co-opt these moments, these beautiful moments of forgiveness in the midst of this ugly, gross system, and use them to perpetuate that system.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people gloss over the race aspect of this crime in particular, and just say, oh, this is a strike against religion. I can't tell you how sick that makes me feel.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess we're all a little queasy with this episode because it's pretty jarring. But really, I mean, to co-opt the facts of this story when this person was like blatantly anti-African American, and this is a crime of a long history of systemic racism. And to say this is just about some spiritualized notion of anti-Christianity, anti-Jesus, anti-religion is just, it's so glaringly missing the point, I think. And so for me, and AME churches, for example, in particular, I mean, have a really long history of, they started, Mariama, if you remember that interview, Mariama is an AME minister. And so an African Methodist Episcopal, I think it's AME stands for. And the church was started by former slaves, and they have a long history of being involved in civil rights. And so the forgiveness that they are offering is is informed by racial
Yes.
reconciliation.
Mhm.
You know, and if you don't get that, then you're not really listening to that forgiveness. You're not really listening to what they're saying.
Yeah, and their
that they want an
forgiveness-
end to racial violence.
Mhm.
It's not just a Christian forgiveness, it's also a racial forgiveness.
Well, that's what a Christian forgiveness is. It's a call to repentance. It's saying, I forgive you and I call you to repent at the same time. Like that's the prophetic part of Christianity that's deeply embedded in our history and in our texts and all that stuff. But yeah, if you do skip over that and just make this like a token of us feeling good about being Christians or something, you totally miss the point.
Did you guys know we have detention facilities just for undocumented immigrants? Like thousands and thousands of just nameless people, like completely unseen and deterred.
Do you know why I know about that?
How do you know about that?
It's actually pretty horrible. So there's detention facilities filled with families, not just like your average idea of what a criminal is or whatever. There's kids who've escaped like political persecution in San Salvador and have hoofed it so many miles to get here. And there are these kids with just like documents, paper clipped to their shirts, and they'll be put in prison, these detention facilities. They'll be completely overcrowded. And there was a story this last year, I think, in Southern California, where a Texas detention facility was so overcrowded that they weren't able to take care of the families that we had behind bars that were here illegally. So they were busing them over to a California town, and the entire town showed up with signs and blocked the roadway and forced the bus to go back because we didn't want them in our detention facility because we didn't want to open up space for them. It was like horrifying. And I know
there were 70,000 border children that showed up at our border last year seeking amnesty. Wow. And most of them qualify as refugees at legal status. I just wrote a big paper on this, so it's like fresh in my mind, but 70,000. And a lot of times they're detained in facilities that they're not even really given food or water. They call them the ice boxes. They're affectionately, not so affectionately named, the ice boxes, because they're as cold as like a commercial grade freezer, and they don't really give the kids adequate clothing or shelter. And it's an incredibly difficult situation because legally the government's required to protect the children. So a lot of times they don't let social workers or psychologists in to work with the kids. They're not giving, only about half get legal representation. So again, that's another issue. You cannot talk about imprisonment and incarceration and criminal justice without also talking about how criminalized immigration is. And we should do a whole episode just on that.
And you know what, we should, because it's heartbreaking to think of immigration as criminal. I think there's a lot,
and the war on drugs has further criminalized it because most of the kids show up because they've been blackmailed to mule drugs across the border, or their home countries are so violent, like a lot of the Central American countries are so violent that they literally cannot survive there. They're forced to flee. So I almost think of it as like a prophetic statement that like these countries are sending their children to us saying, please help make this stop. You have helped create this problem that our homeland is so unlivable, and then we criminalize them when they show up.
Well, we tell all these stories about how countries turned away Jewish immigrants, right? And we get upset because we say during the Holocaust, nobody would take these Jewish immigrants that were trying to escape persecution. And it's happening right now at our foot. This is our generations turning away people who are suffering and letting them try to find their own place. So yeah, I think that's a good idea to do another episode on that. It is heartbreaking to think that that's a big part of our criminal justice conversation should be immigration. That's tough for me.
But it goes back to this idea that like some people fundamentally in their being, because of the color of their skin or where they're from, are inherently criminal. Inherently.
Yeah. I mean, well, you have asshats like Donald Trump recently who was talking about how they're sending us all their problems. They're sending us their drugs and their crime and their rapists, like making this blanket statement about anyone who wants to get in America. It's because they have these devious, reasons to overthrow everything because they're all awful people. Like it's just ridiculous.
Well, okay, but there are really high crime and murder rates in those countries, a lot of these countries where the people are coming from, like Central American countries, for example. But if you look at the history of CIA intervention and trade agreements, we have created economies that are so bereft and so dependent on foreign aid and indebted and just completely corporatized, and that there's no national sovereignty left. Like we've destroyed these countries because of our direct intervention. And so it's
criminal activity is the only way to survive for some people. The only way to survive.
The drug industry is the only industry that's available to a lot of people. And so I think it's so tremendously hypocritical and like long-term memory loss to say, oh, these people, and not recognize our historical complicity in creating. And that's why I think the preventative aspect of this stuff is so important. Education from birth. What's happening to people? What are people having to survive? What is creating criminal behavior? Like that's what we need to be looking at it, not what
And
happens down the
domestically,
road.
right? And even in our
Right,
domestic
right.
situations. And
All of it.
Jeff, you said something about talking about people as criminals, like they're just inherently a criminal or that's their identity. I think that's worth dispelling to some degree. Like, I think good Christian theology sees the image of God in all people, and that even if you murder someone else, you have not forfeited the image of God that's in you. Maybe this
Oh,
is
can you say more about? I mean, I agree with you, but
maybe this
I don't know
is
why.
yeah, yeah. So
You know?
I heard something. This is very personal, but we've said a lot of personal things on this podcast, so why not? The thing that gives me like the hardest problem is I grew up in a Christianity that said that this was completely wrong, but I heard a statement in my pastoral counseling class that has stuck with me and I can't get rid of. And the statement goes like this: people have problems, people aren't problems. Saying that you look at a human being and say they're coming in for counseling, you don't look at them as the problem. You look at them as a person who has problems. And that's actually part of the counseling process, is helping them identify outside of their problems, taking their issue, whatever it is, drug addiction, or they have like bad ways of relating to other people or whatever, and then removing that from them and almost like objectifying it so that they can see themselves outside of that problem. I forgot what the technical term is. So when I look at people who are guilty, we often look at them as like inherently evil. Oh, that person who's just going to kill all these people, like they are the problem, and killing them fixes the problem. And I think as a counselor and as someone who believes that, like, I don't believe that with the fall or whatever, that people lost the image of God, that our sinfulness, we can somehow lose God's image in us. I think that the sanctity of human life is not forfeited by any of our actions. I think any human being, with whatever we have done, there is some thread of humanity that you can point at. And for people who are depressed, this is not just criminal people, but this is all people. There are people whose lives and stories of themselves are so wrapped up in depression and in mental health problems that lifting like the curtains, like finding one element of their life that is like positive and they're not even thinking about it and they don't even realize it's there. If you just focus on that, you can open up this whole world of like experience and existence. And looking at criminals and just saying they're criminal and that's all that they are and they're no longer human is part of the problem, because I hear people talk about criminals like that.
I'm thinking of like the power of labels too, and what it means to like label someone as a convict, or a murderer, or homeless. I know there's like a really big push right now with people who work amongst homeless communities to not call them homeless, to say people without homes, because the homeless is such a derogatory label. Yeah. And considering that like 25% of homeless people are vets and 80% have some form of mental illness, it is embedded in our language to marginalize and criminalize people inherently by the way that we refer to them.
Some
and
people
so maybe
would think that you saying that is just being politically correct, like we got to call a murderer, but you're not saying you're not saying like we should just gloss over the fact that someone committed murder at all.
But I'm going along with what you're saying.
Yes,
like that's not their identity.
Yeah.
That's not their identity. That's something they've done, but it's not who they are in the eyes of God forever.
Yeah. And if we have any listeners who feel like their identity is wrapped up in one thing, that might not be true about you. Like that's not your only identity. Like you are a human being and you share common humanity with us regardless of what you've done.
And nothing has taken away that label of very good. When, you mentioned Genesis, like that idea that when humanity was created, it was very good. And there's nothing, the fall, sin, the things you do wrong doesn't change that nature, that image of God, that as a creation unto yourself, you are very, very good.
And you may have to do a lot of work and have a lot of consequences and need to repent and need to make things right. And you may never be able to make things right, but that doesn't take away like your worth as a human being, I think is what
I'm thinking of the power of like the self-responsibility, like what AA does, like really successful program, right? Mm-hmm. Hello, my name is Mona and I'm an alcoholic. The power of taking responsibility, like what AA does, which is an incredibly successful program, and saying, I'm owning up to this, but I'm going to work through it and past it. But other people don't have the power of labeling me. I am going to, that comes out of feminist theory that only someone has the right to name themselves, like in any perspective, right? And especially when it comes to labels. And I think when we're talking about immigration or conviction or any of this, I mean, to call oneself a sex offender for the rest of their life. And I know people personally who are accused, at 21 of molesting a 17-year-old, and that stays with them for 10 years. And they have to call themselves a sex offender to their children's school teachers. It is, it can be wildly inconsistent and wildly dehumanizing. And I think that's kind of what we're coming to, that maybe the question we're asking is, what does it mean to radically protect and provide for the sanctity of human life and recognize from the get-go that a person is sacred and this person is special and precious. And for me, that comes back to provision of basic human needs, because I think so much crime could be prevented if we secured medicine and clothing and housing and food and meaningful occupation. It doesn't even have to be paid work, but something for people so that they don't have to turn to crime. Like, I think I really do have a vision where that could be true of our society.
And there's ways of preventing, and on the opposite end, there's ways of preventing like the traps that people fall into. Like, instead of giving them opportunities to commit violent crimes, like, and this is not popular with, I would say, 75% of people on my Facebook feed, but I believe in stricter gun control laws, because there are people who are in desperate situations, whether it's emotionally or financially, and the access to weapons that we have is so insane compared to the rest of the world. Like, we have, I think we have the highest rate.
Are you saying get rid of all the guns, Alan?
No, I'm not.
Just to clarify. Okay.
I am saying that we are, I think, the highest nation in the world with gun deaths per capita, and we have more than one gun per person in our country. I think the second place was Yemen, war-torn Yemen, and we're like higher than them. And
I've been seeing stats though, like I think it's Sweden, a lot of people carry guns and there's no gun violence. So nearly as much.
Okay. So there's the thing that I wanted to get at is that there's NRA-backed funding in the federal government that prevents research on gun control. This is true. You can look this up. But private companies like Johns Hopkins have started to do, in the interest of public health, they have done statistical analysis of gun deaths and how gun laws impact. And because the government's not doing it, private companies are doing it. And it just came out this last week that in Connecticut, there's a handgun licensing law. You have to go through a background check before you get a handgun. There was a 40% drop in gun homicides over a large period of time. And so, like, even, there's like one instance, but
there could be other factors, though.
That's true.
But I hate to play devil's advocate to that one in particular, but there could be other factors. But still, that's significant.
I think taking a step in the right direction, and like, it's important to come at this issue from both angles, to say we need to support people and give them opportunities, and at the same time, we need to stop our obsession with violence and gun culture and creating all of these opportunities for people who may not make those decisions, like giving them the opportunities to make them. And here's
an example. It's illegal in a lot of countries to market to children, and we market really violent video games to children, like legally. That's an example of like what it could be to prevent that kind of thing.
I was in Johnny's Incredible Pizza or whatever that is, John's Incredible Pizza, something like that.
I don't know.
It's like a Chuck E. Cheese, right? And there's this like virtual reality game where you like step on a pedal and you like hide behind stuff. And it's just you mowing down these people. And I'm like watching like 6 or 7 year olds just like shooting all of these regular people in an airport. And I was like, what the heck are we doing?
Holy Moses.
On the other side, it's funny. This has nothing to do with it. But on the other side of the arcade, there's this like roulette wheel. I'm not even joking. It's a legit roulette wheel with like cards, like playing cards up on the sides and like blinking lights, and it says like lucky number or whatever, and kids are playing that for tickets, and these kids are like 5 years old, 6 years old, and it legitimately looks like a casino. It's the funniest thing. Well,
going back to the gun thing, I think it's interesting, like so how many hours of like training and how many tests do somebody have to take to get a driver's license, right? Cars are deadly weapons. They can kill people. They're not even intended to kill people. They're intended to keep people alive, but you have to go through like 50 hours of training, all these classes, you have to take tests, but like for guns, you can get them at freaking Walmart. Like, what the hell is that? And so I think a lot of people get really upset, right? Because the NRA lobby is really strong that like, oh, they're trying to take our guns away. No, we're just trying not to let crazy people have them. You know, like that's.
Well, I think we're spilling into a whole
Yeah.
nother episode.
Okay.
I think
Well,
that's
we
a
can
good
cut
place.
that. Is there any like wrap up stuff we can say though about like where we hope we can head
Yes.
with this
we
stuff?
should.
Like what can churches do? What can we do in our local communities? I know there's a really cool organization. We'll put the link in the show notes. For LGBTQ people to write letters to other LGBTQ people in prison to like help support them and make
Yeah.
them feel loved and welcome
Yeah.
and part of something.
And also to reiterate what Mona had said and Jeff has said, that seeing people as criminals is very different than seeing them as people who have committed crimes. So changing our language, changing how we approach them. Yeah, creating community somehow between our churches and ourselves and people who are incarcerated is the way to go.
I think that's key. I think the key is treating people like people and having a value in humanity over our agendas and our political opinions and our systems. And I think that alone will go a long way, but that takes time to foster in people's hearts and in people's lives. And I think it starts with our language. I think it starts, like what you were saying, Alan, with the way that we speak about criminals, the way, and allow that to kind of change the rhetoric. And I think that that's an open door for us to change where we're at. But there's a lot of opinions and there's a lot of ways we can go with this particular issue. Hopefully we've offered something thought-provoking for those of you that are listening. If you have any comments, comment on this particular show in the show notes at irenicast.com/17. We'd love to hear from you there. And don't forget, on Wednesday, we'll have our Facebook question for another way for you to interact with the show. So on the other side of the music, this week we are going to be playing another round of Famous Christians for 100. We are bringing back Famous Christians for 100. I believe it was our second episode that we did this segment, so we're bringing it back. We had some good responses on this, and Alan really likes this.
I really love
this one. This was his request. So
I love Famous Christians.
So how this works is each of us have found two quotes from a prominent famous Christian, and we will say that quote, and then the other two have to guess who said it. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And I think, Alan, we have you starting this week, right?
Yes.
All right, go for it.
Quote, "So, my daughter Katie and son-in-law Riley gave me a drone for Father's Day. A drone. I am really excited about it. Hashtag duck.
What?
Hashtag you have been warned."
It has to be the Duck Dynasty people, maybe. I don't know. Hashtag duck?
Yeah. I think they threw in the hashtag duck thing because drones are like
oh.
Yeah, like duck,
Yeah.
look out. It's going to
Creepy.
take your
Oh,
eye
I
out.
get it. Okay, yeah. Well, a little quick on the uptake here, guys. That's despicable and frightening. What is this person
Are
going to do
you
with a drone?
anti-technology?
I think you're thinking drone in the sense of like it's going to bomb someone. There's good drones. Like
I think they got a drone to go duck hunting somehow. Like you scare ducks, like in Bambi where there's like a gunshot and then they started shooting.
No, I don't like it.
Wow.
Bambi, like,
we've degraded
was
already to
terrible.
killing Bambi.
All right, so who do you?
Who was it?
What
I'm gonna
famous
say-
Christian said it?
I'm going to say Duck Dynasty guy, but I don't know his name. So, guys, yeah,
Jeff?
in that,
I'm going to say, I think he's a blogger, Matthew Paul Turner.
No, that's kind of funny. I don't think he would have said this, but it's
George.
Albert Mohler. He is the president of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He's like the face of Southern Baptist Christians. They're
And
the
now
ones
he's
who
the
just
face of drones.
Yeah, they actually just voted like as a denomination against a resolution against like gay Christians or whatever. It's pretty bad.
Well, I don't think that's, I don't know. I think the drone thing, that sounds kind of cool. Like, like I know that we think of drones in terms, but I mean, there's a lot of really cool hobbyists that do drone stuff, like for photography and stuff. So, I mean, that sounded fun. I mean, you can use it for, evil purposes, but so I wasn't expecting the president of the Baptist Theological Seminary to be fun. So I think that's what threw me off.
So that's a pleasant surprise for you.
It is.
Yay Father's Day, yay drones.
Are you next, Jeff?
No, you are.
Okay. Who said recently that this is not a direct quote, but this is the gist of it. People who manufacture weapons cannot call themselves Christians.
I know who said this because I actually really liked it. I think it's going further than I would have said, but I love like the prophetic statement of it. So I do know who said it. I'll let Jeff guess.
I don't know.
He's a popular guy.
Oh.
I have a friend on Facebook who gave him a nickname back in the day. He called him Pope Badass the First because he's so awesome.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's awesome except when it comes to gender and sexuality.
Very
I'm so
true.
sorry to say.
Very
I
true.
have to call that out.
Yes.
It is the Pope. Pope
I
Francis
agree.
said that.
He's done so much good.
He's done some good stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
Anyway,
like everything, there's good and bad. But no,
you guys like my fun. You laugh.
Stands against that. And I actually have family members who are weapons manufacturers, so that might be a little controversial to say.
Well,
but
you know what? If inmates are now manufacturing weapons and stuff,
true.
then we're like, oh dear, that gets very complicated very quickly. Anyway, all right, Jeff, what do you got for us? This is so far looking up.
Okay. Be mindful. Dehumanizing those who are dehumanizing you only contributes to the cycle of dehumanization in the world.
Who would say that?
What Christian would say that?
Sometimes the tone of your voice, I can't tell if you're being like sarcastic or not.
You know what? That's actually half of what I write and say. People are like, what?
Sarcasm?
That might be a bad thing. I might have to get that checked.
Like it's a condition.
It is a condition. It's not who I am.
Sarcasitis.
It is.
You're a sarcastus.
With like the biggest heart inside of my chest. Just love people.
But that's automatically opposing sarcasm to love, and I don't think that that's true.
You wouldn't.
Be lovingly.
I
don't know. I have no clues.
I'm going to guess Shane Claiborne.
I'm going to guess Obama. Just because. He is a famous
he's a Christian? What?
Yes.
He can't be.
He's black. He cannot be a Christian. No.
He has death drones in the sky. The Pope says he wouldn't be a Christian.
Touche. Wow.
Whoa.
He is like the king of drones, isn't he? God. Okay, who is it, Jeff?
It's Cornel West.
Hey.
Oh my guy. He's wonderful.
Cornel West is awesome.
Okay, Alan, we're back to you.
This person said, it sounds crass, which, by the way, if you start your quotation with it sounds crass, it usually is, right? It sounds crass, but frankly, the best way to stop a bad person with a gun is to have a good person with a weapon that is equal or superior to the one that he's using. The one thing that would have at least ameliorated the horrible situation in Charleston would have been that if somebody in that prayer meeting had a concealed carry.
Okay, I read this quote, but I can't remember who it was from. But I mean, okay, so this is what gets me about this argument, because if you're practicing like proper gun safety, you're like, oh, hold on a second, attacker. Let me go to my gun chamber and unlock the safety. Just hang tight there while I go get it, Like, what are you going to like carry a weapon on your person that has the safety off, like just ready at all times to pull it? That's absolutely ridiculous.
Concealed carry is what he's talking about. I think it's ridiculous because it doesn't take into account the fact that maybe the people in that church didn't want to kill anyone. You know what I mean?
In their church, yeah. It's God.
Anyway, who do you think said this?
I'm gonna guess Mike Huckabee.
That is who it was.
It was?
It's Huckabee?
You got it. Yeah.
God, Huckabee. Okay. All right. Quote. If the Democrats want to insult the women of America by making them believe that they are helpless without Uncle Sugar coming in and providing them a prescription each month for birth control because they cannot control their libido or reproductive system without the help of the government, then so be it. Uncle Sugar.
I still like hearing women. If the Democrats and the women of America.
Wait, side note, does anyone know if Uncle Sugar is taken on Twitter? Because I think I just found my new Twitter handle.
Yes.
Uncle Sugar? It's so freaking great. I feel like you should have a 1970s van and a really bad mustache to have that.
And him leaning out the window saying, I want you.
Uncle Sugar's here, everybody.
I'm going to say this person, you know what? I don't think this person is a Christian. I don't think he's ever identified as one, but is it Rush Limbaugh?
Who do you think, Jeff?
God, it sounds like something Rush Limbaugh would say.
Yeah, some kind of. I'm gonna go with the other Rush Limbaugh, Glenn Beck.
You guys, this was also Mike Huckabee. We had two Huckabees.
Oh,
I know.
He doesn't look like that. Are you?
Maybe we should call him Uncle Sugar.
Dude, he is now Uncle Sugar because
He's Uncle Sugar.
Mike Uncle Sugar Huckabee. I can't believe he said that.
Sorry, snorted
It sounds
Mike.
like a politician would say that.
I know.
My goodness. That's like
He
a
said that
radio host with a cigar in his mouth. That's not.
I know. He said this at the Republican National Committee's
Uh-oh.
2014 winter meeting. Yeah, apparently women cannot control our
control your
libidos
libido.
or reproductive systems. Those babies just keep
Jeez.
popping out. I know. The
Women
government needs
of
to help us.
Women of America, it is your fault that you keep
It's all
popping
our
babies out. That's right.
Popping them out. I know. And if you do pop them out without the help of the government, then we will not help you feed them or clothe them or
That's right.
yeah.
That's like some old school 1950s keep your legs crossed advertisement. That's really weird.
So much wrong with it. I don't even want to start. But yeah, thanks for saying that. I appreciate it. Hey, Jeff, you got the last one?
All right. So this starts with a scripture reference, Jeremiah 13:22. And I'll just read that verse so you have context. And the Jeremiah 13:22 says, "And if you say in your heart, why have these things come upon me? It is for the greatness of your iniquity that your skirts are lifted up and you suffer violence." That's the scripture that's quoted.
It's so incredibly sexual.
So Jeremiah 13:22. Public nudity, like in some movies, is God's punishment. So to encourage or enjoy it is a form of hate.
What?
Okay, so the original
Please make that the cold open this week. Oh.
text.
Wait.
talking
So
about
seeing
Israel.
naked people in movies. Okay, wait. Sorry,
Well,
go ahead, Alex.
The original text is talking about Israel's shame in front of the nations. Like having someone come in and take you captive, talking about the captivity. God's going to lift up the skirt and expose your nakedness to the nations, exposing your shame because of your sin. It has absolutely nothing to do with public nudity, but that's really funny.
It's okay. Wait, I'm just trying to grasp the weight of this quote. So basically, seeing naked people in movies is God's punishment
Yeah.
to us.
Yeah.
What the heck?
You are performing hate on someone else.
Hatred. Wow.
Babies are born. Doctors are just like the most spiteful people in the world.
Well, no, I mean they're talking about like
private
entertainment.
nudity. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I wonder if that includes National Geographic documentaries.
Maybe.
Who would say this?
That's weird. It has to be like a John Piper because he talks.
Yeah, I was just gonna say John Piper. Yeah.
It is John Piper.
He says such funny things and they're so well crafted.
Well, the jump from, first of all, the out of context scripture to public nudity to hate.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It is
He
absolutely.
really likes that dualism, that love punishment thing. He really, really likes that.
Yeah.
Like love hate.
You know, the original segment we did on the like second episode was him saying the whole "if you see less now, you'll see more forever" about nudity.
Anyway, well, that's fun.
All right, well, that'll do it for us this week. Thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoy what you hear, please help support the show by going to iTunes and Stitcher to rate, review, and subscribe. Your ratings and reviews really help the show more searchable for people to find us. And you can contact us anytime with your questions and feedback. Just go to irenicast.com/feedback, and that'll show you all the different ways you can get a hold of us. So for this week, I'm Jeff.
I'm Mona.
And I'm Alan.
Thanks for joining the conversation.